What do you think about when people say things like Biblical Unitarians haven't existed until the 1500s AD, like in the Protestant Reformation?
Yeah, and I think not only with Biblical Unitarianism, but even the Torah movement, I've had people say, well, the Torah movement hasn't started since the 1980s or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I mean, last time I checked, Moses was Torah observant. So I'm thinking what they're talking about is that the label, Biblical Unitarian, the actual label, is
yes,
only 500 years old.
yes,
With that said, I'm sure you can find a lot of labels we take on today that's not that old. It's sort of like when the Hebrew roots, they constantly yell, the letter J is only 500 years old. You can't say the name Jesus. Okay, that's fine. But that's how I learned who the Messiah was, early stages of my life. And I'm not going to disqualify the
sure,
name because the letter J is only 500 years worth. The person behind the name is what matters. And
sure.
the doctrine behind Biblical Unitarian is what I stand on, not how old is the label. Anyone listening, look up the Nazarenes of the first century.
Yeah.
They were Biblical Unitarians. Again,
Mm.
that's older than the fourth century. So just wanted to throw that in at the last second there.
And then they may add, like, historically, Biblical Unitarianism didn't even exist till the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. They say, show us any church fathers, show us any early Christian history where people are defining their faith in God and Jesus like a Biblical Unitarian is. God is one person and Jesus is just a human descendant of King David. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's just the New Testament authors. That's
Okay.
very clear. They are obviously defining it in that particular way. They continue to define God in the same way that we see in the Hebrew Bible. Like it's like in the book of Acts, it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has raised Jesus from the dead. They are
Mm.
continuing to define God in the way that the Israelites, the Jews of the Old Testament, are defining God. And then Paul is heavily emphasizing that the God that he is describing is the God of his own upbringing.
Hmm.
Jesus is continuing to say that his God is the God from the Hebrew scriptures. And so they are not redefining it, they're reaffirming that
Hmm.
particular God. So we take the single person Unitarian God from Judaism that was
Hmm.
carried forth into the belief system of the New Testament writers.
Hmm.
That was, of course, evangelized into Gentile settings, in the mid to late first century, and obviously on into the second century. And Jesus continues to be defined as the descendant of David. Paul will define his gospel in Romans 1 that Jesus is the descendant of David, born of the descendant of David. What is it, 2 Timothy 2:8? Remember Jesus, descendant of David, raised from the dead according to my gospel. Not only is it a definition of Jesus, it's part of their saving faith, their salvation package. That's a big deal. To say that it's only appearing in the 1500s, I think what people are doing is they're saying, okay, we see Socinianism
Hmm.
appearing in that particular time, but a doctrine that is defined in the way that I've described, Biblical Unitarianism, that obviously is there in the first century, and you could see some elements of it in the second century. The problem is that our data from the second century is incomplete. It's
Hmm.
patchy.
Hmm.
So we only have certain people writing certain things, and they're only the influential people
Yeah.
with their own agendas.